Causes of the Civil War. There was not just one single cause that led to America's bloodiest battle. In fact, there were many causes that worked together to cause the Civil War. Soon after the American Revolution ended in 1782, political issues and disagreements between the northern and southern states began to emerge. Let's take a closer look at the key issues and events that led to the Civil War. A key issue that led to the Civil War was slavery. Did one man have the right to own another? During the pre-Civil War period, often referred to as the antebellum period, the South was no longer growing in terms of agriculture or population. Products such as tobacco that once brought wealth to the southern states could no longer grow in the depleted soil. Cotton was not considered cost-effective, and rice was only able to be grown in coastal areas of South Carolina and Georgia. With the invention of the cotton gin by Eli Whitney, it suddenly became profitable to grow cotton. With increased production of cotton, there was a need for an increased number of slaves to cultivate that cotton. By 1860, cotton accounted for over 50% of America's exports. In 1860, 35% of families in Georgia owned slaves. Georgia's slaves population accounted for about 11.5% of slaves residing in America. Slaves with lighter complexions were often given positions in the plantation house, while slaves with darker complexions worked in the cotton fields. In addition, it was illegal for slaves to learn to read and write. Tensions continued to rise between the northern and southern states. The issue of states' rights became increasingly debated. Southern states believed that individual states had the right to govern themselves. The northern states believed that all states should abide by the laws made in Congress and that were signed by the President. Congress passed tariff laws on imports. Imports are products that are brought into an area or into a country. This particularly hurt the South's economy because the South had to import most products due to the lack of factories located in the South, which in turn further divided the northern and southern states. The southern states were primarily agricultural, where the northern states had lots of factories and industry. John C. Calhoun, who was Vice President of the United States at the time, believed that states had the right to refuse or to nullify the enforcement of a federal law. Eventually, a new tariff law was passed by Congress that reduced the tariff rates. In 1819, there were 22 states in the United States. 11 of those states were slave states, and 11 were free states. Missouri applied for statehood as a slave state, which would have created an imbalance between free and slave states. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 stated that if Maine entered the Union as a free state, then Missouri could enter as a slave state. However, the compromise also prohibited slavery north of Missouri's southern border. When California applied for statehood in 1849, there were 15 free states and 15 slave states. California's state laws prohibited slavery. The Compromise of 1850 was proposed, which allowed California to enter the Union as a free state, but the territories of New Mexico and Utah would be allowed to decide whether they would be free or slave states. As part of the Compromise of 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act was passed. The Fugitive Slave Act stated that slaves who ran away to free states would have to be returned to their owners. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, brought about by Stephen Douglas of Illinois, was created based on the idea of popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty meant that when these territories applied for statehood, the people living in those states could vote on whether or not they wanted to be a free or slave state. Both Kansas and Nebraska were located north of Missouri's southern border, and therefore people in the north felt that this idea of popular sovereignty was going against the Missouri Compromise. In the end, Kansas was denied statehood, and violence between the pro-slavery and free soilers increased. Dred Scott was a slave whose owner took him to the free state of Illinois and Wisconsin, and then returned home to Missouri. Missouri was considered a slave state. Scott believed that he should be a free man because he had lived in a free state, and therefore he filed a lawsuit. The lawsuit went all the way to the Supreme Court, where it was ruled that because Scott was a slave, he was not considered a citizen and therefore could not sue. This case further contributed to the tension between the northern and southern states. In the election of 1860, there were 4 men nominated to run for president. Northern Democrats supported Douglas. Southern Democrats supported John Breckinridge. The border states formed a party called the Constitutional Party. They nominated John Bell. Republicans, who were greatly opposed to slavery and other important issues to the southern states, nominated Abraham Lincoln. Because of the distribution of electoral votes, Abraham Lincoln won even though he did not receive the majority of popular votes. All of Lincoln's electoral votes were from free states. Southern states did not provide even one electoral vote in favor of Lincoln. After Lincoln was elected as president, Georgians started talking about leaving the Union. This is called secession. The majority of Georgians believed in states' rights, but were also committed to the Union. The time had come to make a choice. Should Georgia leave the Union? Alexander Stephens of Crawfordville, Georgia, led the cause for Georgia to remain in the Union. He felt that the election of Lincoln was not reason enough to justify a state to leave the Union and abandon the Constitution. Even though Stephens put up a good fight, Georgia seceded from the Union on January 21, 1861. Ironically, Alexander Stephens became vice president of the Confederacy, which is the southern states. In the end, all of these events led to what became known as the Civil War. The Civil War was fought between April 12, 1861 and April 9, 1865.